Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is national champion, head strength and conditioning coach at LSU, Chris Martin. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time, and I'm excited to get into this conversation. Of course, I'm going to kick it to you right away for the bio, and then from there, I'll take it away with some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you having me on as well. So I'm Chris Martin. I'm the head strength and conditioning coach for baseball at LSU. Going back into the past a little bit, I pitched collegiately at Kent State University for 5 years. And then from there, hopped straight into an internship with the Houston Astros. Spent ultimately a little over 5 years in the Astros organization. I did some strength and conditioning work with the rookie ball team, a little bit in the DR. Spent 2.5 years as our rehab strength and conditioning coordinator. And then my final season there was as the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator. Then I came over here to LSU last August. So just coming up on one complete year and about to dive into our second season with fall ball right around the corner.
Was funny for me to witness this crazy emergence of you like coming onto the scene. Of course, you were working in baseball forever, but as soon as you step out of pro ball and you can develop your own social media presence, it felt like you just were thrust into the Twitter sphere, and all of a sudden everyone knew who you are in September or October. It's like, wait, who's this guy that's all of a sudden has takes about workload and strength and conditioning? I just found that really funny. So I guess, how did it feel to have that outlet for the first time in 5, 6 years?
Honestly, a bit uncomfortable. I'm not naturally the one who wants to go and just throw everything out there on social media. Obviously, in the professional setting, you pretty much can't share a lot of the stuff. Everything kind of stays in house, and the stuff that you do share is more so in private conversations. But like the public transmission of information or state kept secrets does not really happen. So I came over here to LSU, and I actually had a couple of people that I know and trust really well who were the ones who kind of pushed me towards starting to have a little bit more social media presence. And they basically both told me they said, while you're at LSU, if you don't leverage the power of the brand that LSU has to kind of make your own personal brand as a strength and conditioning coach, you're kind of being an idiot. And again, I trust them. It's not my like natural forte to post all that stuff on social media, or especially to hop in front of a camera and sit down and just talk into a mic. But you learn through repetition, you get more comfortable through repetition. And so I've tried to be somewhat consistent with that. Probably fell off a little bit during the season, just getting busy on the day-to-day grind of being in season. But yeah, that's kind of how it unfolded. And so I do enjoy it. It's actually helped network a ton. I've met a lot of really smart and cool people through it. So I'm really glad about that. As part of my mission as a strength coach in general, like I want to help as many athletes and coaches as I possibly can. And so in the pro setting, you're kind of limited to those you specifically work with. And now being able to have a little bit wider, reach, it's cool because I'll get questions from high school players, high school coaches, parents, this and that. And so that's been a really cool part of the experience of being in the college setting where you don't have to be so tight-lipped about everything you're doing.
For sure. I mean, me as a fan of the game, beyond just someone involved in it from the performance and health side of things, I love when more people are involved, sharing their ideas, sharing their experiences. And I think you are really uniquely positioned to share so much, given your background in pro ball and now in high level collegiate sports. You're seeing some of the best athletes in the world, as well as having to understand how these things scale. You are not numb to the fact that you guys have great resources at LSU and you had incredible resources with the Astros. So I'm sure a lot of what you have done has had to come with the creative grain of salt in a sense as you have these conversations with people like, well, this is how we do it. But I also understand you don't have all of this technology or all these or all this manpower at your disposal. So here's potentially how you could do it at a lower level. So maybe we can take that thought and go into this a little bit. What has changed for you, if anything, going from the pro side to the collegiate side, whether it's from manpower, from a programming approach? or the touches that you have with your athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start and say like we have phenomenal resources at LSU. We had unbelievable resources with the Astros. But the biggest difference straight up in terms of resources between professional baseball and college baseball is you touched on it there, it's the manpower. So in professional baseball, you've got departments built out on the baseball ops side. You've got strength and conditioning that's going to be, depending on the org, 15 to 20 people. Medical is going to be 20 to 25 plus. R&D, player development, biomechanics, all sorts of sports science. So there's all sorts of departments, and it culminates, and you've got, a couple hundred people or 100, 200 people kind of working on trying to find the solutions to the ultimate question of how do we make better baseball players, or how do we keep our players healthier. And so there's so many really, really smart, talented people looking at problems from different angles. So you get a lot of ideas. The example I give is in Florida when I was with the Astros as our coordinator. I actually pulled our sports scientist at the complex down into my office. And so he and I shared an office, and he sat right next to this whiteboard. And so when I would start to think about maybe a report I wanted to see or a study design that we wanted to run, like we would just get up on the whiteboard and start drawing it up together, talk about it for 30 minutes. And then 4 hours later, he'd have an app built for me. Things happen at a really high level like that in pro ball. Now, one of the downsides of that with having all of those people is sometimes decisions or processes or projects can be slow to be rolled out or to seen to completion just because so many people have their fingerprint on it. So compare that to the collegiate setting, and our staff is much smaller. So it's myself and an assistant on the strength and conditioning side. We have 2 athletic trainers. We've got our coaches, a director of hitting development, a director of pitching development, our director of ops, and then student managers. So again, we're talking like outside of the student managers, or even including them, 20 to 25 total staff members. So things are smaller. So you kind of have to pare down the details or how in depth you go with things, just because you get pulled in more directions. You kind of have to wear more hats. So when I was the coordinator for the Astros, I didn't do a ton of coaching on the floor. So that freed me up to do a lot of the higher level project thinking or things like that, or communicating with different levels or different departments. And then I'm here at LSU and I'm on the floor for between 2 and 4 hours a day, probably most of the days, hands-on coaching. So there goes 2 to 4 hours of stuff that could be deployed towards other projects or reporting or creating dashboards or this or that. I would say the difference in manpower is significant. I think at the collegiate setting, players have more to gain from strength and conditioning as a whole than at the professional setting, especially as they work their way up and they get a little bit older and they're AAA, big leagues, AA guys. They're a little bit older, have a little higher training age. So the strength and conditioning in terms of moving the needle performance-wise probably gets smaller as you go up there. A lot of the guys that we have coming in here at LSU are extremely highly talented, but the physical development is kind of like a big unlock for them. Our left fielder last year was one of the best freshmen in the country. He came in, bat to ball skills, unbelievable. Ability to control the strike zone as a hitter, unbelievable. He just was small. He didn't hit the ball with a ton of authority. He barreled it. His barrel accuracy is unbelievable. And when you compare his max EV to his average or his 50th percentile, the 50th percentile average are actually pretty darn good for what his max was. So with him, it's like, okay, let's just build a bigger engine. And you're going to have a guy who's going to get picked in the top half of the first round. Like, he's just that good. So that's another unique difference between the college and the pro setting, is I think the strength and conditioning lens, or the strength and conditioning factor, can be a bigger X factor for these guys in college.
It's always fun to talk to the people that have so much at their disposal, but I do want to throw this out as the glass half full reminder for all of you listening at small schools or high schools or underfunded programs. You don't need to run anything by anyone. And I'm sure there's been times where you have thought to yourself, like, wow, it would be so nice if I could just act without asking a single question.
Absolutely. Actually, I get really good. I get really good freedom to kind of run the program as I want to here. But again, in pro ball, like, you've got to get approval from different levels, whether that's working your way up to your director or maybe people in the front office, or you've got to get other departments on board. There's a little bit less of that here.
Yeah, makes sense. And we definitely didn't need to spend a lot of time on that. For me, it was just kind of funny after interviewing Chris Matarazzo at Vanderbilt and hearing what they have available to them. Of course, talking to you and what you guys have available. And we talked to so many people with these unbelievable resources. I know it is easy to get caught feeling sorry for yourself if you are someone that doesn't have those resources. Or you can look up like, well, there's just another thing that we have to struggle with. But you also have the beauty in those situations of unilateral decision making or much smaller communication chains in order to put something in place. Not that I'm trying to turn this into a business dynamics podcast. I just figured I would bring it up. So, with that, let's dig into the weeds a little bit. And I know you have experience working as both a rehab strength coordinator, as a minor league strength coordinator, and now doing more high performance work as a whole. You've seen the whole gamut of the rehabbing athlete and the healthy athlete. I think maybe the first place to start, and I was excited to send you this question ahead of time specifically, is the possible delineation between rehab programs and programs for a healthy or high performing athlete. Should those waters be muddied? Should those programs look different? Or really, like, I guess there's no right or wrong answer, I would assume. So just kind of what's your take on that whole space?
Yeah, so they should look similar and they should look different at the same time. And it's going to depend on where you're at in the rehab process and what the injury was. But generally, my philosophy regarding training a healthy athlete is we're going to, reverse engineer the time, energy demands of the sport, look at what the sport demands, and okay, that's what we're going to train for to build the engine so that you can express your skills in that sport. I think strength and conditioning is very general as opposed to specific, far more general than people like to think. Like they think they're like really specific. But we're just building the engine, building the hardware for them to go and express the skills that they have or to help them at times learn new skills. We're doing the same thing with injured athletes. You just have the constraint of whatever the injury is. We're still working towards that ultimate goal while working within the limitations of the injury or the contraindications of the injury. And again, it depends on where they're at in the process. So if it's very early in a return to play setting, and if it's a more serious injury, like a surgical intervention of some sort, the first and foremost things are going to be like, let's return to just function, like activities of daily living. Let's get the wound cleaned up. Let's kind of get some of that acute inflammation out of there as quickly as we can. And then once we get okay from the medical side, like we'll start to train lightly, and we're going to train with respect to not doing anything that's going to further injure the already injured spot, but we're going to work with what we can. So I think a good example is a Tommy John surgery, and guy comes out of surgery, he's going to start therapy hopefully the next day depending on the setting or within a couple days, and they'll start to do some light range of motion with that. Eventually the stitches are going to come out, and once the incision's closed and they're good to sweat, usually when we get the okay to start doing some activities. So we're going to start training the rest of the body. If our right arm's down, we're going to be able to train the left arm doing some sort of pressing, pulling. We're going to be able to do some sort of core work that doesn't involve using the right arm. We're going to train the legs. We're going to toss them on a bike and start to build a back and aerobic base and get some just capacity work going. And then as we go and when we take the steps through the rehab process, eventually we get clearance to do more and more. And it's basically a matter of just catching up that injured spot to the rest of the body. But everything else, we're still training as if we're healthy almost. But we're just having respect for the injured body part.
So really the delineation comes through in the form of specificity more than anything else. We're still trying to maintain the same principles when we look at a rehab program versus a high performance program. We, of course, want the rehabbing athlete to maintain whatever they can. Of course, it's not going to be perfect when a limb is tied down to the side of their body or they don't have complete function of everything at their disposal, but we want things to seem normal from what I'm understanding. Where things kind of separate is just, as you alluded to, the very specific care or the modifications that you have to make so the athlete can continue on with their daily routines.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's always a conversation back and forth with the medical staff that's also providing care and treatment for that athlete. And even if it's a more minor case, it might just be something along the lines of exercise modification, and maybe somebody's tweaked their back, or they've got something where we don't want to load them with a bar on their back, and we go to some sort of like a pitch shark belt squat. It's a very simple example there, but at the end of the day, we're still chasing a relatively similar adaptation, whether it's lower body strength or power and whatever our focus is there. But the methods that we're using might be a little different. And that might be something that we stick with for a long time. It might be something that we stick with for a couple of days or a week until we feel like, okay, we're ready just to kind of return to normal. And again, each case is different. Like I said, the water should be muddied, especially the closer they get to return. Like at that point, we need to train more and more like we're healthy, and we are bringing that injured body part up to speed as we go.
Maybe advancing this discussion a little bit, as you started to mention there, kind of the later stage where the waters do become muddy. I'd love to go down the road of return to play versus return to performance. I feel like that can be viewed as semantics when you get to a high enough level of understanding. But for the layperson, or really for the purpose of these conversations, I feel like discussing the differences in those phrases becomes important. With return to play, there is this idea, to me at least, where we're just trying to do what is minimally necessary to get back on the field. When it comes to return to performance, at least in my mind, again, the way things shift is we begin to take into consideration all of the performance metrics or standards that need to be achieved in order for an athlete to truly be back in the game at the level they expect to be. I'm curious if you take those considerations into the way that you design programs, especially given that there are times, I'm sure, where you are just trying to help a potentially graduating senior who will never play baseball again just get back on the field to play, versus a freshman or sophomore who is marked as a future top 2 rounder kind of revitalize their career or save their career in a sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with this question.
For
So
sure.
I'll say again, when you get to a certain level, return to play, return to performance, it's semantics. It can mean the same thing. But I think it kind of emphasizes where your priorities are. So for me, when I look at what are my priorities when I'm rehabbing an athlete, number one, first and foremost, well, I call these 1A, 1B. Number one is retention. So when we go back into play, we don't get re-injured, whether it's the same injury or something that maybe was a downstream effect of the first injury. So that's the first one. The second one, 1B, is that we return to, at a baseline or at a minimum, the level of performance that we were at before. And ideally, especially the longer the rehab process is, you should return a better athlete than before. So when you've got somebody who's out for several months or up to a year or a year plus, that is a massive window of developmental opportunity outside of just the rehab itself. So you should be returning as good of, if not better, of an athlete. Then the tertiary priority, far below those, for me at least, is the timeline. I think if you take care of the first two principles there, the timeline takes care of itself. And so when you talk about return to play, it almost flips that, where it's like, okay, we just want to get back on the field as fast as possible. Well, then timeline becomes your priority, and you might skip steps or return somebody who's not fully ready. You could say it depends for everything in sports performance. So take that with a grain of salt, because it does depend. If we're at LSU and we're in the postseason and one of our star players tweaks something, we might put him back out onto the field before, you typically might see a high A player in the middle of June who's a prospect for a major, or for a pro organization, because we need the production from that guy right then and there. And again, it just becomes a cost benefit analysis. And so the cost of him getting re-injured might be outweighed by the benefit of us as a team having him on the field. And part of that goes into then conversation with the athlete and what they're comfortable with. And things are different nowadays in the collegiate setting because everyone's got an agent and an advisor that has an opinion too. But generally, for me, in a quality return to play or return to performance setting. We are looking for retention, not getting re-injured, and returning to at least a baseline level of performance that we were at. Those are the two most important things. And I think a lot of times people get caught up in the timeline because when you get the injury diagnosis, you usually get a prognosis too. Sprained ankle, 4 to 6 weeks. Well, the athlete might respond much better and we could get them back in a week and a half or 2 weeks. But since we arbitrarily said 4 to 6 at the beginning, sometimes people hold them out longer. And again, that to me is reversing the principles and putting them in reverse order versus like, okay, has the athlete returned to function? Great. Now, what other boxes do we need them to check? They check this box. Great. Move to the next one. And whenever they check the box, they check the box. There are, again, then I say that, and there are times where you do have to have some respect to general tissue healing timelines, again, specifically with surgical cases. And this is why you should always be working hand in hand in lockstep with your medical staff so you're all on the same page. And it's important to lay out processes as a staff of saying, hey, when we have this injury or this type of injury, these are the boxes that we want checked before we put an athlete back on the field. And then it's your responsibility as a staff to uphold those and not be influenced by outside pressure. You might have a coach that's really pushing for somebody to get back on the field, or you might have an agent or an advisor who's pushing for them to be on the field, or they're actually saying like, hey, he shouldn't be returned yet, he's not ready. So again, there's a lot of people that have their opinions on the decision, but ultimately as a high performance staff between strength and conditioning, medical, and then your coaching staff as well, you all need to be on the same page throughout that whole process.
You weren't kidding. A lot definitely went into that question, and probably more went into the answer, especially because I'm not so sure I phrased it in the most succinct way possible. Of course, after I ask it, I'm going back and thinking how I could have asked it better, but I thought you did a wonderful job answering it. Let's take the same concept and let's get a little injury specific, knowing the nature of this podcast being very medial elbow oriented. I'd love if you could now go down the road of explaining what goes into a well-run UCL rehab as far as you are concerned versus maybe one that misses steps along the way or a mediocre program.
I got to be careful with my answer here because I'm going to rub people the wrong way.
That's what we're all about here, though. At least I hope we're on the same page with this.
If you want a mediocre program, go to your surgeon and ask for their return to throw program. That's what's going to get me in trouble.
That's fair. We're on the same plane as you with that one.
I know that's very blanket, but that's how I feel. Is like these programs are archaic. They were written 15 to 20 years ago. They are distance-based, which if you want to go down that rabbit hole, I will fire away. I think distance-based throwing programs are just unbelievably dumb. They're all the same. They're cookie cutter. They have pre-built deload weeks, which physiologically makes no sense just to randomly throw deload weeks in. There's a lot of issues with standard return to throw programs. I will say the world of throwing rehab and high performance is starting to get much better at it. And there are a lot of people that are starting to see the problems and work on solutions. That's a plus. Outside of just the throwing program in general, I think if you want a mediocre return to play program, you're going to go somewhere where the medical staff, the person that is prescribing or coaching or watching you throw, and the strength and conditioning coach, or some combination of that, if they are siloed and not working well together, you're going to get bad results. You're going to get guys that are doing the same thing in PT that they are in their lifts. You're going to get guys that are doing things in their lifts that their PT says is contraindicated, and then those people are going to butt heads. So there's a lot of ways you can run a poor UCL, a return to throw program. I think the ones that are well run are objective based when it comes to prescribing the return to throw. You have to have some objective measure, and distance is not good. I repeat, distance is shit. So there's different ways to measure this. I think the easiest one that's broadly available is velocity, but you can get into things like arm speed. Now, splitting hairs, I don't really like torque on any of the wearables that are currently out there. I think the Driveline Pulse does a decent job with arm speed. I think you've got to be able to objectify readiness in some capacity, whether that's using the Flex Pro grip, which we just got some, so we're excited to dive into those, grip strength, shoulder strength testing, range of motion testing. So stuff like that has to happen regularly to assess progress and readiness. You have to, again, objectively write the throwing program, but there has to be a place for subjective feedback from the athlete, and you have to be sensitive to that as the prescriber or the coach, because if you're not listening to the athlete, what they're telling you about their body, you're being an asshole. Now you've got to know the athlete and understand, like, okay, who is giving me like really quality information that I know I can make decisions off of, and who do I have to take with a grain of salt? Maybe they have a really, really low pain threshold, and what they're describing as pain might just be general soreness. So there's some education that needs to happen in there too, from coach to athlete or PT to athlete. But I think those are some qualities that make a generally good return to throw program. And we can dive into the rabbit hole on any of those.
The first rabbit hole I'm going to go down is exercise selection. And I think this might even go a different road than you were expecting, which kind of has me excited on my side. So outside of the actual throwing program and specific flexor training, what exercise or exercises do you think are 100% necessary in a program or often get overlooked in a return program?
So necessary, I think you've got to cover your bases in terms of what's happening with the forearm flexor. So I think we need to train some form of wrist flexion. We need to train wrist extension. We're not getting the flexors there, but we need to train basically all planes of the wrist: flexion, extension, ulnar and radial deviation. And I think we need to spend a lot of time with the flexion. I think we need to train with our fingers at length. So the rock climbing community is a really cool place to look for this, and Dr. Keith Barr and some of his research. But those guys have some of the strongest hands on the planet. And so I like anything that's going to train grip strength at length, whether that's a yielding or an overcoming isometric. So you could use things like the Flex Pro Grip to get more of an overcoming isometric, trying to push against that immovable object. I think something it's kind of yielding in nature, but it's like holding the caps of dumbbells, I think is great. I think just doing general grip work, whether it's with a grip machine or just a handheld, and then you can kind of progress those. All that should be included when it comes to training the forearm flexors. We get to less isolated exercises, and maybe we start to do a bicep curl and bicep curl variations that are going to train different parts of the forearm. Again, still an isolated movement, but we're kind of working up, and now we've got a bigger joint moving. And I think that's also a huge part of this.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask this piece again. I'm very happy that you hit on forearm flexion in particular, in hopes that we can get kind of creative or talk about something new here. What outside of the arm potentially do you think programs are potentially missing?
Outside of the arm, I think generally a high level aerobic base is missing in the sport of baseball, not just in the return to play setting, but generally in the sport. And it's funny, I think the pendulum has swung on this over the decades. So you go back 80s, 90s, and it was your conditioning was running poles. And it was at times like a lot, like 20, 30 poles. Then it swung towards, well, we need to be super, super specific to the demand of the sport. And you throw one pitch and then you rest for 20 seconds and then you do it again and you sit down for 5 to 10 minutes and you do that 7 times. We got to a point where people were doing interval training or alactic training, repeat sprint training. And we got to this point where it was like, okay, well, we're missing a foundational piece of aerobic development, and that is just general capacity. It's the boring work. There's nothing you can really replace it with, because everybody wants to look for the shortcut that's going to reduce the time. How do I train my VO2 max or whatever in the least amount of time possible? Oh, HIIT training. Okay, cool. Well, all the research on HIIT training is like very limited to short windows of time. And if you expand that over a wider horizon, high volume, low intensity aerobic work actually is going to give you a bigger change in VO2 max over a long period of time. We're talking 12 months plus. So I think that's missing in baseball. I think you need to have some of the high intensity work. I think pitching itself like gives you some of that stimulus, but you can supplement it with repeat sprints or tempo runs. The slow, long, steady distance, or the slow zone 2, zone 1 steady state stuff where you're going 30, 45, 60 plus minutes multiple times a week. One to multiple times a week, I would say, depending on time of year, gets missed a lot. And what a lot of people don't appreciate is when you talk about energy systems now, and we use the ATP PCR system when we pitch, and that's what we use for explosive bouts. And it's one second of work and then 20 seconds of rest. Yeah, but having a well-rounded aerobic system also is going to help replenish that quicker. And so I think that gets missed a lot of times. So I would say that's probably one of the things that I see missing the most in the sport of baseball. And the reason is it's time intensive and it's boring. It takes a level of discipline that's different than getting under a heavy bar or lifting a heavy deadlift. It takes a different kind of discipline to go for a jog for an hour or to ride a bike for an hour because you're just sitting there staring at something, and it can be really easy to not want to do that. So it takes a type of discipline to get that work in. It's easy and it's boring, which is interesting.
Specifically for your pitchers, how often are you programming that sort of work? And does it vary? I'm assuming it varies during the time of year, but does it vary dependent on the pitcher's role, as in if they're a starter or a back end guy?
Yes, to both of those. In the off season, everybody's relatively the same. We're going to work up to 45 to 60 minutes of zone 2 cardio, probably twice a week. And then we're going to supplement that with tempo runs 1 or 2 times a week beyond that. And then we're going to sprint twice a week, but I don't want my sprint sessions to turn into conditioning, but like that's the general scope of sprints and conditioning that we're doing with these guys. As we transition closer to the season, we really dial that back. And the great thing about aerobic capacity is it's like max strength. It's very hard to gain, but it's also very hard to lose. As long as you're maintaining a little bit, like you're going to keep those residuals that you've gained. So when we transition over to in season, we're going to run tempos once a week. We are going to do our zone 2 stuff once a week, and that's going to generally be 30 to 45 minutes, one session a week. So again, a lot lower of a demand there, but a lot of these guys are getting a higher aerobic demand just by playing the sport and pitching more often or pitching longer durations for the starters. Now that I come around, like I don't even think it's that much different. The relievers might do their conditioning throughout the week in a different order depending on when they throw in games, but they're still going to get at least the one steady state and the one set of tempos, and maybe we'll add one if we just need an extra recovery day or for some reason the schedule shows it. The starters will kind of be on a very set schedule of when they're going to do their stuff. That's the biggest difference.
I don't know how much of a quote unquote conditioning talk we've ever had on this podcast. So as it started to come up, I knew I needed to ask a few questions. Now I want to go back to specifically the forearm flexors, as you had mentioned earlier. And now let's get into specifics. Obviously, you guys are bringing on Flex Pro Grip. You mentioned it a couple times. But prior to that, or even what you're planning to do as well, how do you build mass of the forearm flexors and tendon resiliency in the off season? And then how do you look to maintain that in season?
Yeah, so a lot of the work also happens with our athletic trainers. So they have arm care programs for our pitchers that are 3 separate days that are done on different days of the week around their throwing programs. That encapsulates a lot of the forearm work that they're going to end up doing in the off season when throwing load and throwing intensity or volume and intensity are both typically lower. I will give them additional forearm work in the gym. So we might do wrist curls, we might do grip stuff with plate walks, we might do PVC rolls or barbell rolls, and we're going to add a few sets of that towards the end of a workout, probably twice a week. Some guys maybe even a little bit more if that's like an area that we have concern for. And then they're pretty much year round, as long as they're here and doing some sort of throwing, they're doing arm care work with the athletic trainers. And then as we get into the season, depending on the guy, I will back off on that a little bit because they're getting so much throwing volume from playing in games and throwing bullpens, and a lot of the rest of the volume that is needed is coming through their arm care program with the athletic trainers. I do think you can get to a point where you're just creating more fatigue and not letting the body adapt or recover throughout the season. And I don't want to be pushing a guy to a point where his forearm flexors or his forearm muscles are fatigued because of the work that he's doing with his strength and conditioning program in season.
How have you seen arm care change over the years? I guess what's considered arm care and then even the specifics of the programs that either you write or that you are a part of?
So I think, again, it's gotten more advanced in terms of exercise selection. I think it's gotten more advanced in terms of understanding the anatomy and the biomechanics of the shoulder or the arm in general. We're not just talking about the shoulder girdle or the elbow, but we're talking about the scapula moving on the rib cage, and we're talking about the rib cage's ability to contract and expand. So I think as practitioners have gotten a better sense of that, we can get a little bit more targeted in terms of what specific individuals need versus a long time ago is like, let's do our IYTs or our empty cans and call it a day. And we would probably do that right after we throw. And then band work kind of came into the fold. And now I think the methods are a little bit more advanced. I think there's more of an appreciation for not just doing like lightweight, high rep stuff with developing shoulder, elbow, just call it arm musculature, shoulder and arm musculature. I think there's an appreciation for using higher loads and getting a bigger stimulus from that. And then I think, again, using objective testing has been able to now create more targeted programs. So if a guy is weak in a specific area, that can become more of a focus instead of just blanket, everybody's doing this program when they're done throwing. So if we've got a guy who has low shoulder external rotation scores, like we're going to work to build those up. If we measure your shoulder external rotation and you've fallen below baseline, well, now we need to make an acute change to your program, whether that's us adding exercises to try and add strength, or if we think this is an acute fatigue issue and we need to remove exercises to just allow you time to recover and allow the tissue to come back to baseline. So I think there's just, with the introduction of technology, the understanding of anatomy and biomechanics getting better across the field, and then an advance in methods, I think all of those have kind of led to generally better arm care programs.
Based on some of your answers earlier in the podcast, i.e. the throwing programs, specifically the return to throw programs, and now discussing arm care, it sounds like objectivity and technology has really played a major role both in advancements and then now just your ability to manage the day-to-day of all of your athletes. So when it comes to tech, what is it that is going to make you want to adopt something new?
That's the money question when it comes to any sort of tech, is like, why? And generally the why has to be, it's going to help us make better decisions on behalf of the athletes in our organization. And if it's not going to do that, then we don't need it. So first, if you're bringing on new tech, it's got to be valid and reliable. Once you've got that box checked, what decision is it helping us make better? So again, I have used tech a lot, whether it's force plate technology, measuring grip strength. Now we'll get to be a little bit more specific with our forearms, measuring with the Flex Pro grip, whether it's using driveline pulse and calculating workloads from it, or something even more rudimentary where we're counting number of throws and maybe we're assigning a subjective high, medium, or low intent, calculate a workload off of that. But it's got to help you make better decisions. And so then if I'm collecting and measuring workload, like what am I doing with it? Because we're in a day and age now where resources are so readily available that not everyone's got them, but a lot more people have access to them than just professional organizations. And all the professional organizations have them, but not everybody gets the same results with the same technology. And it's okay, how are we using it to drive decision-making that's going to benefit us? So if I'm measuring workload, well, now I need to be making programming decisions or recommendations to the coaching staff or the player about day-to-day workload things. So an example might be if we're measuring some sort of workload with throwing, you could call it stress, you could call it arm speed, you could call it arbitrary units depending on what you're measuring. And maybe days are split into high, medium, low volume, high, medium, low intent. And we can calculate an AC ratio and say, okay, here's the window we want to stay in. We're running a little bit high. Today should be a low intent, low volume day. Or maybe we've got some room to play with our AC ratio. We want to have a higher throwing load day. Okay, well, how do we accomplish that? Do we want to go high intensity, low to moderate volume, or high intensity, high volume? Or do we want to go moderate intensity, high volume? So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of come to those conclusions. But at the end of the day, you've got to be using that tech to help drive the decision making. Stuff that's not throwing specific, like the force plates, for example. If I'm having guys jump on them, I need to be making programming decisions off of it. Or even if we're relating it to throwing and maybe we're jumping a guy somewhat regularly, maybe it's daily during a return to throw process to add as part of a readiness test. And we pair that with some subjective information. He comes in and jumps like crap, and you ask him how he's feeling, and he's like, I'm just kind of beat up from the workout, and maybe I didn't sleep well last night. Okay, well, that's also a signal to me that maybe we need to go change something with the throwing today. So all of these techs, I think the people who use them best blend them together to just bolster their decision-making process. And those who make the most right decisions over a big enough sample size are going to end up having the biggest outcomes or the best outcomes and creating the biggest competitive advantage.
Makes a ton of sense. And here's another data tech question for you. I was having a conversation the other day with a pitching coach at a Division III school. They have force plates that they're able to use in the weight room, which has been awesome for them. But one of the things that we were discussing is not just the dangers or flags that go off when someone is performing below standard, but also on the other end of the spectrum, when someone seems to be peaking, not just maintaining their trend, but setting off alarms like, oh my gosh, this guy is outperforming anything he has ever done before. Is that ever entering your mind as a risk factor when an athlete is entering kind of like a quote unquote peak area where they're outperforming anything that they've done previously on record?
It can be, yes. Like when we think about throwing specifically outside of previous injury, what's the biggest predictor of injury risk? Well, it's an individual increasing his velocity. If we have a guy who was topping at 95 and he comes out and one day or for a week or 2 weeks, he's now 96 to 98. That is a new stressor that his body has not managed before. And so if we treat it as if he is just doing everything as normal, like we could be playing with fire. So maybe we need to introduce extra recovery modalities. Maybe we need to be very mindful of volume in that time frame until that person has built up what we would assume to be an acceptable chronic workload under the new intensity. So absolutely, same thing with sprint speed. If I have an athlete who hits a new top speed wearing the catapult in game, or we're running a time 30-yard dash and he hits a new top speed, yeah, like I'm cognizant of the fact that that's a massive central nervous system stressor. His tissue has never handled him running that fast. So yes, for the coming days, like I got to be mindful specifically with running of what that athlete's doing so we can hopefully avoid having any sort of soft tissue injury risk.
I don't think that concept is discussed as often. We have gotten pretty good at an industry of recognizing the red flags in the basement. When guys are bottoming out, we can recognize like that's not good. We should probably do something about it. But it is way harder to try to bring a guy back down to earth when he's outperforming what we think of as status quo, because obviously we want the highest performance output possible, but there's risk associated with that. And we can talk about that from kind of the acute to chronic workload ratio concept. At that point, you're effectively outside of the ratio. You're creating forces outside of what your body has previously handled, and that is a shock to the system.
Yeah, and that can be central to the nervous system. Your nervous system might get fried from it, but your peripheral tissue just might be more beat up and damaged. And so again, we use the velocity concept. If I throw harder, it's reasonable to assume that my forearm flexors are probably working harder. And a lot of times when a guy goes and hits a velo PR, they tend to be a little bit more sore the next day. And that's okay. That doesn't mean they're hurt, but that means we have to be very cognizant of the fact that they just did something that they've never done before. And that's what we want as a coach. Like you think about general adaptation syndrome, and we have valleys, and then we want that to translate into a peak over time after exposing ourselves to a stressor. We just then have to be cognizant that might require a little bit of extra attention. And I think the reason is like you said, when something gets flagged as bad, like it's already negative, so we're okay with addressing it. When something is positive, we want to celebrate it and we want more of it. More. Well, yeah, over time, but like let's rein it in and so again, like the guy who goes and hits a velo PR and maybe he's a reliever, like we'll just make up a guy. Maybe he's a reliever and he's typically used for somewhere between 20 and 30 pitches in an outing. Well, maybe if he's going to get used again that weekend or in the next coming days, we limit it to say, hey, like you're going to go like 3 batters or probably 15 pitches at most. Like that's a reasonable way to manage that PR. You don't want to punish somebody or restrict somebody for that, but you should be aware and maybe make some slight modifications. Or maybe it's something where we give you an extra day of rest and it's not a volume thing. It's not like, oh, you threw 50 pitches compared to 30 because everybody then knows like, yeah, we should give you a little extra rest if you're not used to it. And then they go throw 97 as opposed to 95 and everyone wants to celebrate it and do it again. But it's like, no, it's the same concept. It's just a different variable. It's intensity, not volume.
Now I want to shift this a little bit to the volume discussion. Earlier in the year, it got celebrated and picked on when Cade Anderson threw 120 something, 130 pitches, whatever it was, in that unbelievable outing he had back in, what was it, April against Oklahoma or something?
Yeah,
It
it
was
was
against Oklahoma, right?
Oklahoma, probably week 4 of SEC play. So yeah, like early April, late March, somewhere in there.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, that was the talk of the town in baseball social media that a college pitcher threw that many pitches. I'd love to know what adjustments you guys made to his program after that to get him ready for his next start, if any, and then also what work went in ahead of time to know that he's good for this. Because I know you guys are not making a decision just like looking at a lineup card or like, oh, he's got the hot hand, we got to ride him. You guys are using data-driven decision making to understand that he's good to go out for the 125 or whatever it was.
Yeah, so it was 135 pitch complete game shutout with 14 strikeouts, and he'd probably tell you he should have had 16 or 17 strikeouts. Like, come on, dude. So a lot went into that. First and foremost, credit to Cade. Like he is one of the most professional guys we had on the team last year. He came in and he worked his butt off from day one, even before I was here as a freshman. That's how he was. And he comes in, he does everything that's asked of him to a T, maybe a little bit more, but definitely no less. And he's not the guy that's going and doing so much extra that you're like, what is he doing? So credit to Cade first and foremost. I think he built a really good aerobic capacity throughout the course of the year. He got stronger. He was in a better spot physically in season than he was when he arrived on campus in August at the beginning of the year. So there's that piece of it. Like physically, he had put in the work to handle some pretty high workloads. Then our coaching staff does a really good job of, and I think this happens a lot across high level baseball, is early in the season, they slowly ramped up his pitch counts. His first week of the year, he probably threw 70 pitches. His second start, it was probably 80, maybe 85 pitches. I don't think he threw 100 pitches until maybe his fourth start or fifth start. And this Oklahoma game was probably his seventh or eighth start. And so then he had a few outings of 100 pitches, or maybe up to like 110 was kind of like 100 to 110 was usually what he would end at. So he did have a relatively good chronic workload built up in terms of like yes, it was a spike, but it wasn't a massive spike. Other pieces that went into this decision-making process were Cade struggled in the first inning of that game. I think he got out of a jam in the first of 2 guys on or bases loaded, and then maybe another one in the third. And then after that, he retired something like 12 or 14 guys in a row or something. So there was a lot of really low stress innings. He was pitching out of the windup. He wasn't laboring inning to inning all that much. And so that played a part of it. Like as the game went on, he appeared to be getting stronger, and he had several very short innings. The coaches they're checking in with him every inning, but specifically as that gets later and later, and they're checking in with him on how he's feeling. And Cade does a good job of being pretty open with that. And then on the back end of this, he also had an extra day of rest. So typically in college, you're going to pitch Friday and Friday, but this game was on a Thursday, so we had an extra day of rest the following week, and we were aware of that. So that played into the decision-making factor. of letting him go to 135. And then coming out of that, because we had an extra day, the day following that outing, typically we'll have a guy lift and do some conditioning, some steady state for a starter the day after they pitch. We did do some steady state work, but his lift, we came in and we did 20 minutes of mobility. We just got the body moving around, feeling good. So we moved the hips, we moved the spine, we moved the shoulders. We got some good breathing work in, and then he did 30 or 40 minutes of just an incline walk on the treadmill, and we cut it. So very low stress day, more of like a feel good recovery day than he typically would have the day after his outing. And then from there, we just hopped into his normal weekly routine.
I love that. You guys were able to take the situation at hand, consider all the factors, and make a decision accordingly. I mean, that's how these things should be done. I think it's grossly unfair to look at some of these organizations or programs and think that coaches or staffs are just making decisions for a win and loss column. Of course, win and loss column matters a ton, but you're working with the livelihoods of young athletes. And given everything that you explained there, that obviously opened our eyes to what goes into that process. So I appreciate you doing that for sure. There are a couple more things I want to get to before I let you go. And I know with only about 15 minutes left, we should probably hit these pretty hard. So next thing in the mix, when you look across baseball, is there anyone that you're gaining insights from or that you think is leading the way thought-wise or is inspiring you to think about the game or your practices in a new manner?
There's probably too many to list. Man, like I think social media is a dangerous place these days for the ability for athletes and people to receive bad information. But on the flip side of that, it is such a wonderful place for really bright-minded people to share information. I've been fortunate enough to be connected with a lot of people who are doing really cool things in the game of baseball, whether it's some physicians when I was with the Astros and our team physicians and kind of working with them to rewrite our throwing programs, physical therapists who I think some of the brightest and best physical therapists are the ones who don't see everything through a medical lens. Like they see it through a high performance lens. They see it through a skill acquisition lens. I think Daniel Newcomer at Driveline does a really good job with that. I think Nolan Repe, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, Nolan Repe.
I think he does a really good job of that. And then on the high performance side, like there's a ton of people. I know you guys are close with Casey Mulholland, but he does a lot of really cool things. I think some of the folks at Driveline and their high performance guy, Bryce Kreider, puts out some really good stuff. A former Driveline guy, Chris Langen, puts out some really high level stuff on pitch quality and pitch design and things like that. There's too many to list, and I'm going to leave people off. And that sounded just like a Driveline promotion, but it really wasn't. I talked to Chris last night, and so that was one that came fresh to mind. I think the guys over at Cressy have done a really good job in this industry for a long time of doing the basics at a very high level and very consistently, and then like slowly branching off and getting better at some of the intricacies. But like those guys do the staples better than anybody, and that's why they get results. Just too many people to continue to list, but that's like generally it.
Something I find interesting about that answer, until you mentioned the Cressy guys at the end, Bryce Kreider was really the only like super high performance-esque guy you mentioned. A lot of stuff on the throwing side, a lot of stuff on the rehab side, which now has me curious. How much baseball specific content are you consuming to get better every day as opposed to strength and conditioning content? Like what is that spectrum for you?
Yeah, it's in terms of content that I'm consuming, it's probably a little bit more strength and conditioning as opposed to baseball specific. Again, I go back to, I think strength and conditioning is very general, but if you apply it in the right ways, a lot of methods can be applied to certain environments. And so I follow a ton of people on social media. I also think it's very easy to feel like you're behind everybody when you're seeing like, man, these guys do this unbelievably well. This person does this unbelievably well. It's probably 2/3 strength and conditioning, 1/3 baseball. And then it's like podcasts or books that I'll read and listen to. Those I would say it's a wide range. It might be business related, it might be strength and conditioning related, it might be just listening to people talk about Major League Baseball currently or college baseball. So it's kind of all over the place.
From this content consumption, is there any research, whether clinical or just basic case study work, that you are hoping is coming down the line? Like, is there something that you want to dig into or that you think baseball or high performance needs to spend time on that hasn't gotten much attention yet to date?
I think one that I would love to see, and again, this is really in return to throw. There's a little bit out there in terms of like we need to create proxies that are easily understandable for people, for the masses to complete a return to throw program. We need proxies for intensity. Granted, you can buy yourself a pocket radar and spend a few $100 there, and you've got a great resource that shows you how hard you're throwing the ball. But like, what does that mean for certain individuals? How do we quantify what does 80% of max velocity mean for one versus another? I like the concept of using velocity like heart rate reserve, where like you can't throw a baseball 0 miles an hour the same way your heart can't beat 0 beats per minute. So heart rate reserve takes your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate, and then that assigns a percentage. Again, like diving into like how does that apply to throwing? What's an acceptable minimum velocity? How does that change from guy to guy, and then how does that change your prescription? Because if we have two 95-mile-an-hour arms, one guy, and again, I say minimum velocity is like a throw that actually resembles us throwing a baseball and not just like lobbing something somewhere or throwing a dart or something like that. I don't know, just creating proxies that can be generally used for the masses, because I think in elite sport and professional sport and high level college or high level facilities, we're getting better and better and better at prescribing these kinds of things. But a lot of kids, high school kids, don't have access to that kind of resource. And how do they then go and complete a high quality program without just making 20 throws at 60 feet and then 20 throws at 75 feet and then 20 throws at 90 feet and so on and so forth?
Yeah, without forcing you to talk about distance again, because I know that's like handing Superman kryptonite. We're gonna make you crumble into something.
I get so mad.
Yeah. I do think it's really interesting, that concept of the heart rate and reserve, kind of like velocity and reserve. There's pro guys that I talk to that throw an average fastball of 95 miles per hour, something insane. And then you talk to that same guy about playing catch, and those guys legitimately can't throw a ball slower than 84, 85 miles an hour, just because they're so twitchy in the way they move. If they are going to throw a ball in the 60s or 70s, it is an entirely different movement solution to get that done. And how do you consider that in a return to throw? Obviously, 84, 85 is still a very high velocity throw in the grand scheme of things in the baseball world. But then if we're looking at individual stresses, is that the same as one of us trying to throw 85? Or some guy like, I mean, yeah, there's other guys who throw 95, but the first throw they make every day is 54 miles an hour or something like that. Some guys have to have that steady buildup. Then you have your twitchy, superhuman individuals that pick up a ball, they pick up anything, and every single thing they do is done at 90% of their max capacity just when they're going through the motions. Yeah, I do think that would be an unbelievable road to go down when it comes to research. And I don't know how we begin to structure that. I don't know if you have ideas, but I'm all
Nothing
in.
concrete. Yeah, nothing concrete at the moment.
I guess if anybody has ideas, please write in some capacity. And Chris, I'll probably continue to poke your brain after the call about some of this, because now you've got my wheels spinning. I do have one last question for you before I let you go, and it involves you being an ultimate winner. You have all these rings. At this point, I don't know how you have enough fingers for all the rings that you've achieved over the years, but I'd love if you could just kind of talk about championship culture, what you have seen as kind of consistencies from team to team, even though they're all different settings that you've won these championships in? What goes into a real championship makeup?
Yeah, so I think the first thing when you define culture, it's not buzzwords, it's not hooting and hollering, it's not ELE, everybody love everybody all
It
the
should be,
time.
though. Great movie.
Yeah, I just had to throw the semi-pro reference in there. Culture, very simply, the best definition I've ever seen for it is it's what you accept and it's what you don't accept, and upholding that standard. I think that's very simply put. Like, here's our standards. If you're going to be a part of this program or this organization, this is what we stand for and this is what we do. And that goes for staff, that goes for players, that goes for everybody involved. And I think the ones who do it at the best cultures are the ones who really uphold those standards. And if you're going to be a part of this, you have to get on board. And if you don't want to get on board, you can't be here. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're a bad person or that we don't like you as a person. It just means this isn't the best fit for you. And the people who are okay with saying, like, you can't be here, and that's okay, it's not a malicious thing, like, those are some of the best leaders you'll ever find. I think you have to have individuals within that group that are willing to say that to people or willing to tell them, like, hey, what you just did is not up to our standards. To win championships, you also have to have really good players. And so everywhere that I've been very fortunate to be in a spot where we had very good players. And that happens through development, but it also happens through things like recruiting and signing the right people. So, like, let's not let that be lost on us. But some other things I've noticed, I do think that the teams that tend to win, like, they like to be around each other. It's not a chore to go to the ballpark every day and go to work as a staff member or go to work as a player. You don't dread going to see everybody. So you want to be there. And I think that when you have everybody generally pulling in the same direction too, so there's not people undermining the mission of the organization. This team that we had this past season at LSU, I've never seen a team closer than them. I've never seen a team more relaxed than them when things got hard, almost to a fault at times. Like, you wanted them to, like, dig in a little. And it was just like we'd go down 5-1 in the third inning and they'd be like, well, they still got to pitch to us 6 times. Like, yeah, good luck. So they didn't really, feel pressure. They were relaxed. And I think that stems from they like to be around each other. They rooted for each other. The guys who didn't play were genuinely happy when the starters did well. That's special. When you've got guys who aren't like, man, I hope this guy sucks this weekend so I can get a shot next weekend. I didn't see that. That's special. That's not common. So I think those are some general characteristics of a high level culture.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I'm sure you have a very interesting perspective on it with you not necessarily being the one who writes the lineup card. You probably get more human interactions with these guys than maybe anybody else in these programs, aside from Isaac, an athletic trainer, somebody who is support staff, right? Generally, support staff get the human
We're the
versus
bartenders.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
We
You
get
guys
to
hear the problems.
they sit and they spit everything to us. So we're the bartenders. We get the behind the scenes info.
That's stated perfectly. So maybe the first team that actually labels their support staff on their website as bartenders, that is the ultimate recipe for success.
That might be it. Might be that
Yeah,
simple.
it probably should be. Now I want to keep going down this culture and makeup rabbit hole, but unfortunately we do have to let you go because championships don't sleep, and I know you guys have a recruiting visit coming up, and you have to be fully engaged for that. So,
Absolutely.
Chris, with that, I do want to say thanks a ton for joining us today. This has been a pleasure, and I look forward to many more conversations.
Awesome. Again, I appreciate it, Adam. Love what you guys are doing, helping grow the game and hopefully, being a big piece of this arm injury epidemic that hopefully we can get under wraps here soon.
For sure. We believe, and we're glad to have you guys on board. So I guess we can finish the only way we know how with someone from LSU on board, which is a go Tigers.
Love it.
All right, everyone out there, thanks for laying back with us. Catch y'all next time.